Some criminals offend out of desperation, financial ruin, or deep-seated resentment. But in October 2019, in Cape Coral, Florida, a 25-year-old man coldly snuffed out the lives of two completely innocent women within a matter of hours. There was no prior conflict, no history of animosity, and no logical motive. He did it simply because he wanted to. His name is Wade Stephen Wilson, a man the internet would later dub the Deadpool killer. Yet, the most chilling aspect of this case extends far beyond the sheer brutality of his crimes. A deeply disturbing phenomenon emerged when his trial was broadcast live in 2024. Why would a remorseless, cold-blooded predator who showed absolute contempt for human life become the object of intense infatuation for thousands of young women across social media? Why would they flood him with love letters, create romantic fan edits, and idolize him, completely blinding themselves to his horrific actions simply because of a rebellious bad boy aesthetic and a face covered in dark, menacing tattoos? Is the man behind that arrogant, smug smile at the defense table the product of a severely damaged brain? Or does this obsession reflect a highly toxic, distorted psychological trend of the digital age? In this deep dive, we will dismantle Wade Wilson's official trial records, unravel the dark fractures of his past, and expose the disturbing reality behind this modern psychological anomaly. The deadly sequence of events began on the evening of October 6, 2019. Wade Wilson went to a local nightlife spot along McGregor Boulevard called Buddha Live. At the time, Wilson had no tattoos on his face. He was introduced to people as Junior, and witnesses described him as friendly, polite, and charming. There were no immediate red flags. Wilson met his girlfriend at the time, Melissa Montanez, at the establishment. Throughout the evening, Wilson repeatedly pressured Melissa to leave the bar with him, to go to the home of a man he had just met that night, Jason Shepard. Feeling uncomfortable with going to a stranger's house, Melissa refused. Angered by her refusal, Wilson took her car without her permission. Because it was a manual stick-shift vehicle, Wilson struggled heavily to operate it, stalling and grinding the gears as he left. After Melissa departed, Wilson returned his attention to the bar, where he met 35-year-old Christine Melton and her lifelong best friend Stephanie Johnson. The two women had been inseparable since high school, having moved across the country together, and eventually settling in Florida to be close to their families. Both worked at a local restaurant called Duffy's. An immediate mutual attraction developed between Christine and Wilson. Later that night, Wilson, Christine, Stephanie, and Jason Shepard all rode together in the stolen vehicle back to Shepard's home. While everyone was drinking and smoking marijuana, some members of the group also consumed a small amount of cocaine, though witnesses noted no one was acting out of control. Wilson and Christine were intimate at the house before Wilson attempted to drive the women to Christine's home in Cape Coral early Monday morning. They arrived at the residence on Tudor Drive a few hours later. Stephanie Johnson felt a profound sense of relief that they had arrived safely despite Wilson's erratic driving. Because she needed to get her child to school and prepare for work, Stephanie prepared to leave. Christine hugged her, kissed her cheek, and told her she would see her tomorrow. Stephanie noticed absolutely no signs of danger and had no concerns for her friend's safety as she left Christine and Wilson alone in the house. It was shortly after Stephanie's departure that police believe Wilson turned on Christine, brutally strangling her to death right in her own bed. By 8 a.m. on Monday, October 7th, Wilson began making erratic phone calls to his girlfriend, Melissa Montanez, on her workplace phone. Melissa finally answered just before 9 a.m. She was furious that Wilson had stolen her vehicle the night before and demanded its immediate return. Her anger caused Wilson's demeanor to shift instantly, escalating into volatile name-calling, aggression, and intense intimidation. Melissa agreed to meet him at her business plaza in downtown Fort Myers. When Wilson arrived, he was driving a vehicle Melissa and her friend had never seen before, a black Nissan Versa belonging to Christine Melton. Wilson stepped out of the car and immediately tried to drag Melissa inside the vehicle. Wilson stands at 6 feet 6 inches tall, while Melissa stands at 5 feet 2 inches. His physical grip was so overwhelming that it nearly ripped the dress completely off her body. During the struggle, Wilson tackled Melissa to the ground. Because he had forgotten to shift the Nissan Versa into park, the vehicle began rolling forward, slamming into another car and grazing their legs. Wilson then began punching, slapping, and choking Melissa. She later testified under oath that at that moment there was nobody behind his eyes anymore, and there was absolutely no reasoning with him. Wilson dragged Melissa up the stairs to her business, pinning her against the wall by her throat. Believing she was going to die, Melissa tried to buy time for the police to arrive. Suddenly, Wilson struck her straight in the face, causing blood to fly everywhere. Stunned by the explosion of blood, Wilson paused for a split second, allowing Melissa to duck under his arm, run into a neighboring business, and lock the door. Wilson ran back to the black Nissan Versa and sped away. Between 9:30 a.m. and 11 a.m., Wilson drove back into Cape Coral, where he crossed paths with 43-year-old Diane Ruiz. Diane was a beloved mother of two, engaged to be married, and worked as a server at the Moose Lodge. That morning, she had decided to take a 15-minute walk to work. Wilson pulled up alongside her in the stolen Nissan Versa and feigned needing directions to the local high school, asking her to get into the vehicle to show him the way. Inside the moving car, Wilson ambushed Diane, wrapping his hands around her neck and choking her while driving. He steered the vehicle into a vacant, undeveloped lot in North Cape Coral and rolled her unconscious body out onto the grass. Upon realizing that Diane was still alive and breathing, Wilson climbed back into the driver's seat, shifted the car into gear, and repeatedly ran over her body 10 to 20 times until, in his own words to detectives, she looked like spaghetti. A nearby homeowner on his back lanai witnessed the black vehicle backing out of the empty lot with tree branches sticking out from its sides, an unusual sight on a property where cars were never seen. Just after 3 p.m. that afternoon, Fort Myers police officer Timothy McCormick spotted the black Nissan Versa parked at Joe's Crab Shack. Wilson was sitting inside, shirtless. When the officer approached, Wilson appeared visibly nervous, defensive, and completely uncooperative, claiming he was merely waiting for his girlfriend. When Officer McCormick attempted to detain the 25-year-old for the misdemeanor battery of Melissa Montanez, Wilson rolled up his window and maneuvered the vehicle around the patrol car, fleeing the scene. Because police were only investigating a misdemeanor domestic battery at the time and were entirely unaware of the homicides, department policy prevented the officer from engaging in a dangerous high-speed pursuit. Later that afternoon, Stephanie Johnson received a call from the Cape Coral Police Department asking why Christine Melton's vehicle had been found abandoned in Fort Myers. Terrified for her best friend's well-being, Stephanie rushed to the apartment alongside family members. Cape Coral police officers forced entry into the Tudor Drive home that evening. Within 45 seconds of stepping inside, Officer Charles Caruso discovered a large, cold bundle of bedding and clothing piled in a hallway near the bedroom. Upon moving the sheets, officers uncovered Christine's leg tattoo. She was cold to the touch. The autopsy later revealed that Christine's face was completely black and blue, her fingernails were broken from fighting back, and her brain suffered massive swelling from concussive trauma. She had internal contusions on both lungs and her colon, alongside extensive deep hemorrhaging in her neck. While police cordoned off Christine's home as an active crime scene, Wilson was already blocks away, breaking into another Cape Coral house by removing the screen and glass from a window. The homeowners had conveniently left for Ohio earlier that morning. Wilson made himself at home, consuming multiple White Claw seltzers, eating their food, and stealing their clothing. Earlier that day, a frantic and bloody Wilson had walked into a local graphics shop owned by an acquaintance, Joshua Lukic. Wearing nothing but sweatpants, missing several teeth, and covered in blood, Wilson begged Lukic to help him buy a plane or bus ticket to flee the state, frantically admitting that he had just done something horrific and killed people. When Lukic realized Wilson was telling the truth, he stepped out and dialed 911, but Wilson fled before authorities arrived. Ultimately, Wilson contacted his biological father, Stephen Testaseca, begging for money and an Uber to escape. Testaseca had been only 14 years old when he found out he was going to be a father, and Wilson had been given up for adoption to a church family shortly after birth, only reconnecting with his biological father at age 18 to routinely ask for money. During their phone calls on the day of the murders, Wilson proudly bragged about his actions, showing an absolute lack of remorse. He detailed how he choked Christine Melton and left her in her bed because she was too heavy to lift into the trunk. He then explained how he targeted Diane Ruiz, stating he attacked her because she was a fighter who came back to life 3 to 4 times, and that he ran her over because her continued breathing triggered his urge to kill, describing himself as a lion and his victims as prey. Overcome with horror, Stephen Testaseca chose to save lives. He obtained Wilson's exact location, but instead of an Uber, he coordinated with the U.S. Marshals Service to have his son peacefully arrested. On October 8th, while Wilson was behind bars, massive search teams, K-9 units, and helicopters searched the wooded areas near Hector Caffaretta Junior Elementary School, where Diane Ruiz had last been seen. Her purse had been found and turned into the school by a local parent. On October 10th, Cape Coral Police Sergeant Justin DeRosso noticed a single vulture circling over a vacant lot in North Cape Coral. Upon investigating the area under the shrubs, authorities discovered Diane's heavily decomposing body. Her nose was fractured, her breast was lacerated, her body sustained 11 broken ribs, and her hands bore extensive defensive bruising. On November 19, 2019, State Attorney Amira Fox officially announced premeditated first-degree murder charges against Wilson. While awaiting his trial, Wilson consistently displayed a chaotic and highly organized criminal mindset within the Lee County Jail. He compiled a lengthy record of violent infractions, including fighting, destroying county property, and shattering surveillance cameras. In September 2020, Wilson and his cellmate, Joseph Katz, attempted a daring escape. Lee County Sheriff Carmine Marcino revealed the men attempted to pull a get-out-of-jail-free card by systematically removing the weather stripping and bolts from their cell window frame. Using a makeshift metal tool, though the reinforced structure was physically impossible to bypass, the attempt solidified Wilson's status as a high-security risk. Wilson also aligned himself with the Unforgiven, a notorious white supremacist prison gang, and proceeded to tattoo a massive Nazi swastika and structural stitches directly onto his face and head. In 2023, authorities intercepted recorded jailhouse phone calls where Wilson used complex coded language to orchestrate a major drug smuggling ring, coordinating with outside associates to drop Ziploc bags filled with methamphetamine directly into the facility's recreation yard. He even wrote letters to local news station NBC2, granting a recorded phone interview where he confidently lied, claiming he was entirely innocent and was being framed by a massive, fictitious human trafficking syndicate. Yet his calculations were strictly manipulative. At one point he turned informant against a fellow inmate who tried to hire him to execute a hit on an ex-lover, using the information solely to leverage better treatment from prison guards. Jury selection finally began in June 2024, taking 4 full days to seat a 16-person panel. Days before the trial, Wilson's defense attorneys Kevin Shirley and Lee Hollander filed a motion requesting permission for Wilson to wear heavy cosmetic makeup to cover his extensive facial swastikas and stitches, arguing it would prejudice the jury pool. The judge granted the request, but Wilson chose never to apply the makeup, leaving his menacing facial alterations fully exposed to the courtroom. During individual polling, the central issue focused on the death penalty. Defense attorney Kevin Shirley argued that capital punishment should be reserved strictly for exceptional homicides. During the testimony of Officer Timothy McCormick, the defense aggressively moved for a mistrial because the officer accidentally mentioned reviewing sheriff's records, which could imply a past criminal history to the jury. Judge Nicholas Thompson promptly denied the motion, ruling the comment brief and inadvertent. On June 10, Assistant State Attorney Andreas Gardner opened the state's case with a haunting declaration. This case was about killing for the sake of killing. He presented the jury with a graphic, vulgar display of power, playing recorded interviews where Wilson explicitly told detectives, "I've done it once. I'll do it again." Blunt force trauma for compliance, strangulation for silence. The defense elected to present no opening arguments. In their closing statements, attorney Lee Hollander attempted to establish reasonable doubt regarding premeditation, urging the jury to consider a lesser charge of second-degree depraved mind murder. He argued that Wilson was completely whacked out of his mind on a cocktail of drugs, rendering his actions a reckless disregard for life rather than calculated intent. Assistant State Attorney Sarah Miller delivered a fierce rebuttal, completely shattering any claims of diminished capacity. She read directly from the trial transcripts, quoting Wilson's own chilling words about Diane Ruiz. "The truth is I picked the girl up and killed her. I knew in my mind I wasn't going to drop her off. As soon as she went to get out, I grabbed her by the neck and choked her out until she couldn't breathe anymore." Miller detailed how Wilson bragged about the killings to his father and law enforcement, noting that while Diane's body was being scavenged by insects in an open field, Wilson's primary concern during his interrogation was whether he could secure a hamburger and French fries. It took the 12-person jury just over 2 hours to return a verdict, finding Wade Wilson guilty as charged on all 6 counts, including the first-degree murders of Christine Melton and Diane Ruiz, grand theft, battery, burglary, and petty theft. Wilson stood stone cold, showing absolute zero emotion as the clerk read the verdict, while the victims' families wept and held hands in the gallery. Cape Coral Police Chief Anthony Sizemore stood with the families, declaring that absolute evil had entered their community and destroyed innocent lives. Following just over an hour and a half of intense deliberations, the same jury recommended capital punishment. Under Florida's landmark 2023 amended statute, a death sentence no longer requires a unanimous 12-12 vote, but rather a simple 8-4 majority. The jury voted 9-3 for the death of Christine Melton and 10-2 for the death of Diane Ruiz. On August 27, 2024, Judge Nicholas Thompson officially ratified the recommendation, sentencing Wade Wilson to death, alongside an additional 12-year sentence for his jailhouse drug smuggling operation. Today, in 2026, the internet illusion of Wade Wilson as a glamorized, rebellious bad boy has completely evaporated against the grim reality of Florida's maximum security death row at Union Correctional Institution in Rayford. Stripped of his arrogance, his global audience, and his basic human privacy, Wilson spends 23 hours a day locked inside a concrete cell measuring a mere 6 by 9 feet. There are no television cameras to smile for and no social media followers to validate his actions. He is forced to wear the mandatory death row uniform consisting of a bright orange t-shirt and dark blue pants. Every single meal is passed to him through a small metal slot in his heavy steel door, consumed in absolute isolation. He is permitted to shower only 3 times a week, and every single second of his existence is monitored under continuous 24/7 physical and video surveillance. The cold concrete walls of his tiny cell are now his entire universe. A silent and claustrophobic countdown, while his attorneys launch lengthy appeals contesting the constitutionality of Florida's non-unanimous sentencing law. The digital crowd's romanticization of a cold-blooded killer has proven to be nothing more than a secondary act of cruelty, stripping the victims of the basic dignity of public mourning and ignoring the profound grief of children permanently robbed of their mothers. This case stands as a harsh warning for the digital age. It forces us to examine our own reality, proving the necessity of recognizing red flags and trusting our instincts before entering brief, unstable relationships. More importantly, it exposes a disturbing moral void online where people romanticize evil based entirely on appearance. Turn off the screens, turn away from the distorted glamour of the digital world, and remember the human lives that were stolen. Christine Melton and Diane Ruiz were real people with real families. Neighbors described Christine as a sweet, happy-go-lucky person who would help anyone, while friends remembered Diane as a beautiful light who didn't have a bad bone in her body. Their lives and their deaths are not internet entertainment. Let us hold a final moment of silence for those whose voices were stolen, remembering that true justice lies in honoring the innocent, not celebrating the monster. May Christine and Diane rest in eternal peace.